Cheers, Jamie. Yeah, hi guys. If anyone that doesn't know me, my name's Silas Hedley-Lawrence. My farming journey started in New Zealand, where my family have dairy farms and kiwi fruit orchards. So I kind of always grew up learning how to produce milk off of grass and quite a healthy dollop of synthetic nitrogen. But it was basically moving cows to be outside all year round with kind of lean subsidy-free systems that were really run as businesses, and that kind of framed me down my journey when I started managing farms in the UK and came across organizations like Pasture for Life, around how I design those systems to both work as a business but to also be able to operate year round, in a grazing platform as well. So what I'm going to do today is dive a little bit into the peer learning side and this climate resilience piece, because both of these things for me have been a key part in what I've um, navigated or had to experience or benefited from the last kind of 10, 12 years farming over here in the UK. The first one I managed in the UK was actually in the Isle of Wight. And I learned a lot there. That was the first time I'd come across Pasture for Life, and that was my first little introduction to what this kind of community offered and this way of thinking. So, with this ethos around pasture fed and then starting to get into organics alongside that New Zealand dairy style system, that's the system I implemented. And we saw amazing stuff on that farm around the kind of economics, the profitability, the amount of grass that we produced, and the amount of biodiversity and wildlife. Over the 2 years I was there, we never really had one of those big drought years or one of those big wet winters that we've kind of had a few of over the last 6, 7, 8 years. But I did get a few of those at my following job, which is at Henley-on-Thames, which was a Pasture for Life certified, organic certified Longhorn beef farm with a farm butchery. So what I found in that situation, very different soil types to other farms that I've managed, quite shallow. So the dry periods hit really hard, and that's when we had that big drought in 2018. So I learned a lot of hard lessons in that drought around kind of how to mitigate that risk when you get that dry spell. Um, and really started to come into my own, getting more engaged with Pasture for Life as well. Since then, I went to Oxford, which is a research farm, kind of medium heavy clay soils, and we did a big research study called the AMP Grazing Project, which looked at what happened on that 1,500 acre farm, moving from kind of set stocking to kind of fully adaptive multi paddock grazing. And that had the big drought in 22, those two really wet winters and summers that we had over the last couple of years. So really interesting stuff there, where we really navigated those periods without seeing drops to livestock performance, and still getting soil health gains, which is really cool. Since then, I'm now a trained agroecological coach, which I did with Integrity Soils. So I've learned a lot from those guys, Nicole Masters and her team of coaches. Some of those ideas I've put into this presentation, a lot of the stuff around how we think and like the power of community and connection and what makes you tick as an individual and as a group. So we'll dive into some of that. And what I'm doing now is the Cotswold Cattle Company and Grassfed Farmer, two separate businesses. So Grassfed Farmer is my coaching consultancy business. I've got a range of clients, about 20, 21, something like that, across the UK, both organic, conventional, mixed farming, just pastoral, big and small. So I've learned a lot in that period. And these themes in those different businesses keep coming up as well. That climate resilience piece is always in the top three goals that these guys want to hit. And most of them are engaged in some kind of groups and peer learning. Cotswold Cattle Company is my farming business, which is integrating cattle into arable farms in the Cotswolds. And then we thought it'd be a really smart idea to build our own food brand. So we have two catering trailers now and a gazebo where we go around doing smash burgers at private events and festivals and all that kind of thing. So got a few hats, and I think to be where I am right now and juggling these different things, that peer learning has played a massive part in that journey for me. So let's dive in. I'm actually going to start on the peer learning side and just plant a few ideas and go through, oh God, it's not working, go through a few frameworks. So one thing that I absolutely love is this framing of thinking, which is a book that I did on Audible recently, which is Simon Sinek's The Infinite Game. I think this is a really interesting way just to frame how does our community in agroecology or regenerative ag, how do we want to place ourselves for long-term success? And Simon's way of doing it, he looks at a lot of big businesses, the really successful ones like Apple and Google, and has gone through this thing called infinite game theory. So he didn't come up with the theory, but he's written a book about it. And we basically have two mindset frames, if you like, or paradigms around business. And this translates into farming for me as well. So we've got finite games, which is about winning and losing, control, this kind of short-term annual focus or quarterly focus, lots of competition, often quite a fixed mindset, also quite resistant to change as well. On the flip side of that, we get infinite games or infinite mindset. So that's more about staying in the game with a long-term vision. It's more about competing against yourself, like constantly developing, learning. You want to be better than you were last year and to pick up on those lessons and to lean into your network, lean into your neighbors to soak up what you could learn from them instead of trying to shut them out and be better. And that kind of leans into this mindset piece around growth over fixed. And for me, that's been such a key theme in helping clients unlock new levels in their own business, within their own teams or within that structure, whether it's a family, but also in the stuff that I'm doing in my own world. I'm constantly trying to think, right, actually, there's new ways I can look at stuff. There's new ways that we can lean into this. And who can I lean into? Who can I reach out to that can help me on that journey? So have a little think on that as we go through. Where have you, and we've all done it, we all do both as well. You all sit in both of these camps and you'll be able to sit and think, where have I been more in that finite mindset around kind of winning or competition or kind of, resisting change, and where we maybe lent into this more kind of growth and curiosity side. Oh, computers being a tricky. So what's the magic ingredient in this kind of infinite mindset? For me, it comes down to curiosity. Because when you can stay curious, you keep asking questions and you drop a lot of these assumptions, and it frees up your ability to feel like you don't have to know the answers. It doesn't matter if you think you look stupid, and actually you're able to learn and to lean into others in a much more capable way. So, can anyone think of and share a light bulb moment that came from a peer that changed the way that you think or the way that you now farm? I'd love to hear from a couple of people. Anyone brave enough?
Everyone, no one wants to be first, but everyone wants to be second.
None? Okay. Cool. Okay, I'll give an example of my own. So, what's been a light bulb moment for me that came from a peer? I thought that that grazing and livestock could fix everything on a farm. And I've been challenged more recently to think that the more managed a system has been, sometimes it takes more than, sometimes we need human tools to get ourselves out of the mess we've created. And nature can't always just do that, or the time frame we want it to be done isn't always on the time frame that we would like it to be. So a few years ago, I thought that grazing cows, that would just fix everything. Now I'm much more open to lean into and discuss with more conventional farmers. Actually, maybe they have tools in that toolbox that could actually make these systems get on that track a little bit quicker and then come back to things more like grazing management. So that was a big assumption that I had to drop. and I've looked and learnt from others and systems, and that's been a big thing for me recently.
I'll give
Anyone
you one.
else?
I'll give you one, Silas. Oh no, here's one from Judith H. It's biology that does the chemistry and the physics in the soil.
Hmm. Yeah, so biology is responsible for about 80% of that mineral cycle. So the more biology we have, the better our pasture plants perform, the better our cropping systems perform. And often things that we might have been deficient in the past, whether that's in your livestock, minerals, or pasture, that can be unlocked by feeding that soil biology. And that's going to be a key theme actually later on in this presentation. Cool. That leads quite nicely into me. We all sit in this world of knowledge. Now, this is a thing, I think Aristotle spoke about it and Confucius, all those old dudes, all the old Greeks and things, right? And this fascinated me when I first heard about it. So there's kind of three worlds of knowledge out there. There's the little bit of space of knowledge that we all have that we know we know. What's something, can anyone share something that we know we know? Or know that you know? Quite a bunch today.
Very quiet bunch today.
Monday
Something that
blues,
we
is
know we
it?
know. We know the Earth is round. There we go. Someone's put in the
There you
chat.
go. The earth is round. We know that. Most people can agree on that, right? So what comes next is stuff that we know we don't know. And that's a bigger pool of knowledge. We know that we don't know a lot more things than we do know. So what's something we know we don't know? I know that I don't know a lot about how to build a rocket that can get to Mars. I know that. What's even bigger is all the knowledge out there in the world that we don't know. We don't know. And the answer to that is what is something you don't know is what? I don't know. So when I saw this diagram, it really, really made me think. You have all these conversations, and we can get so fixated on this way of farming or this way of doing it is the way to do it because that's the way I've done it and I've seen results. But actually, there's potentially an infinite amount of nuance and angles out there that we're not aware of that could actually take our businesses and systems and our own ability, our own skills, our own kind of way of operating to a whole nother level. And when you think about that, it really, really gives you license to just kind of let go of a lot of that baggage that you need to know the answers, that you need to be on it all the time. And actually, you can not know, and it's absolutely fine. You can ask the stupid question. You can pick up your phone and call someone that you went on their farm walk or you saw them at a conference and you really wanted to know more about something because ultimately, in the grand scheme of the world of knowledge, we all know absolutely bugger all. And for me, actually, starting on my consultancy journey about 18 months ago now, that was a big shift for me. When the penny dropped on this, the anxiety I had about going in with new clients and everything completely dropped because it opened me up to lean into them, their knowledge, their experience, to think about new ideas and new angles, and also to say, you know what, I don't know the answer. Let me go and figure it out. Let me go and talk to so and so who does know. So when we're talking about peer learning, this is, oh, I've just lost power. This is like a really key. Hang on, let me sort this out quick. 1 second, guys.
No, you're good.
Good. So hold on to this basically and really challenge yourself that you're going to find safe places of groups of people that you know that you get on with, that you see eye to eye. But actually, it's often in the groups of people, the individuals that challenge you more, that don't share your same world of knowledge that you can really pick up and learn and see things in a different light and a different angle. So, segueing on, for me, livestock and grazing and just regenerative farming systems in general are really about that collaboration and evolution, not the control and this kind of fixed templates. Like we've all been suckered to it. Oh, we had a grazing plan or something and it worked really well. And then we rinse and repeat. Or we still can't quite let go of some of these old habits that we've all kind of been brought up with. And actually, the more we can keep coming back, questioning how we're farming, how we're showing up in the world, how we're like integrating with our, our farm team, our staff, our family, all of these things should constantly be a work in progress. And it's really like quite subtle, soft people skills. So it's not easy to pick up a lot of the time. It's not easy to constantly be able to deliver on that. But the more we can just stop and frame what we're doing, to think about really how do we just keep that growth mindset, the more we can really refine our systems for the better. So we always hear these words bounded around a lot as well. We've always heard about context and mindset and regen ag, but also that kind of power of our community. And these three things are all intrinsically linked. Because, so I'm really struggling with my screen right now. Yeah, so context, mindset, and power of our community. Again, these three things are constantly evolving. Our context never stays the same. My context in the last 6 months has changed a lot. Where I am juggling different parts of this business, my priorities, the context of some of the clients I'm working with, the weather that we've had this year compared to last year has been quite a different thing to deal with, as well as that mindset piece. When we're kind of challenging ourselves and learning from friends and peers and maybe you've been on courses or something, that it intrinsically has a knock-on effect on your context and how you integrate with peers and other people in your network. And it's really important. There's a lot of introversion around this. How do you think? How do you operate? What's your context? What's your mindset? What does this community mean to you? But don't forget you're one cog in that space. These things apply to everyone else in your business, everyone else in your networks. So it's a very dynamic thing. And from that, actually, we get a lot of opportunity, and that's a massive plus side. But it's also something to think that's just part of the journey. We shouldn't feel that we need the answers. We shouldn't feel that these things should be fixed, and embrace that kind of evolution. So, what do I actually mean by mindset? Does anyone know? No ideas? Cool. I think we should have booked this for Friday and got everyone some beers or something. Hello, Deborah. Have you got an idea?
Yeah, just I mean, I guess it's the whole thing, isn't it? Your worldview, the map that you have of the world that you inhabit that
Mm.
influences all of your thoughts, and inherited knowledge and understanding. All of those things, I think, make up our mindset.
Exactly, absolutely bang on. And a lot of what you mentioned there were kind of stimulus that are external and how that kind of comes into that melting pot, which is into your brain, and what that creates is your mindset. Then what is churned out is a byproduct of all these different variable factors. So, yeah, mindset is basically a person's way of thinking. And that can change, right? That's obviously different for each individual, but your way of thinking will change. The way that you thought one week might change to another, or you might have a life experience or see something or make a change in your farm and business that makes you see things through a different lens. So our mindset basically determines how we perceive and make sense and respond to the world around us. And that's also where the value of community and peer learning comes in. Because if we all had the same mindset, if we all had the same experiences and the same perception and perspective, we would all just be, blinkered horses on a one-way track, right? So it's really interesting when you can see the value and not the kind of that kind of competition, or that the pushback you sometimes might get from someone with a very different mindset. What could you actually learn from them? What could you see or hear differently from someone with a very different worldview to you? So what kind of things might influence our mindset? Deborah touched on a couple of them, which were really great. Has anyone else got any other ideas? What things might affect it?
Rachel's put experience and learning.
Yep, big one. Experiences and learning.
From Penn, financial commitments and fear.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It's what are the bare essentials going on in our life that might really distract us from other things, right?
Yep.
Could be finances, could be family, anything like that.
And one here from Andy saying community, and another from Shanti saying health. Dorrit says intelligence.
Yep. All of those are absolutely right. And there's so many. Like, these are just some that I thought of. And for me, actually, a lot of these, when I looked at them, have a very community theme: discussion groups, family, feedback, friends, neighbors, culture, education, peers, media, beliefs, relationships. About 50% of the things that I could think of are linked to other people, communities, and networks. You always hear that saying, right? You're the product of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Or probably what's as true now these days, you're the product probably of the 5 sources of media that you consume, whether that's podcasts or newspapers or whatever. So really think on that. Are you in spaces and networks that really challenge you and that bring you more value and lighter things in life? So one thing I'd really like people to think on is this framing of perspective. So what is our perspective?
Just feel free to put answers in the chat, folks. It won't make you come on to the microphone if you don't want to. Just feel free to fill up the chat with as many ideas as you have.
Yeah, if you could read them with me, Jamie.
I'll have another go on perspective if you want. I mean, that seems to be a really kind of personal one, because it is absolutely about the place in which you are standing. You've got a lens there as your image, and it feels like that's exactly what perspective is. It's the lens through which we view the rest of the world. I might say one of my lenses is a feminist lens, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. It's almost the angle at which you're looking at a situation. So I think a classic one with this is that kind of succession conversation where you have a family who are focused around the same farm, the same business, but dad has a different perspective from the daughter. They're looking at it from a very different angle. Maybe with some similar things in that melting pot of mindset. There might be similar, the neighbors are the same, the environment's the same, the family's the same. But actually the way that they see the situation is very different. And again, something that I saw, which is so simple, that had quite an effect on me recently, is this picture. And I love this picture. There is no right or wrong perspective and no right or wrong mindset. This picture, 2 blokes screaming to the rafters that they're both right, but maybe they are both right. What's your perspective? The way that people are seeing that world, the answers or the questions or the ideas or the challenges that you might come across might be completely legitimate. And actually, if you can hold yours, but put yourself in a position where you can see someone else's, that really, really opens up big opportunity. Opportunity to find common ground, where all of a sudden you might be able to work together collaboratively with different perspectives, where you can learn from them and they can learn from you. And this is the same, obviously, on an individual basis as it is within a group or within a community. And actually, I've really enjoyed over the last 18 months or so of getting outside of my usual bubble so much and going to different spaces and getting involved with different perspectives. You know, I love going to Groundswell and Oxfordville Farming Conference and all of those, but on the whole, it's a lot of similar perspective and lenses around, you know, what we're doing in the world. And what I've really enjoyed being is in more conventional spaces with farmers that think in a very different way to maybe how I do. And actually, when you find that common ground, you find all of a sudden there's a lot of interest there, where before there was maybe a lot of barriers up, almost suspicion sometimes. So that's been a big win for me recently. And you know, I've just said I've gained so much from peer learning in groups, and it's when I've started thinking about this stuff more deeply, I've that snowball's accelerated a lot quicker in the last year or so. This is a graph which I think everyone will be able to relate to, and I've pinched this from my mate Russ, who pinched it from something else. So this is actually the Kubler-Ross curve of evolution or change or something around mindset. So we've renamed it the Kubler-Ross one, which Ross has reframed this around our journeys through this mindset piece. And some of us say that we were farming in a certain way and we had a light bulb moment, and now that we found the kind of regenerative bug or the pasture for life bug or something. So this kind of maps out this emotional journey of things that we will experience and things that might cause us to feel motivated or things that might demotivate us. And I can really see and pinpoint times in my life and my career where I can really see when I was at that point, and I'm sure a lot of you will. So we kind of get this first initial light bulb moment, as I say, this kind of mental shifts. You see on the left here, we've kind of got time and then the level of morale or motivation. So maybe you heard something, you went to a conference, you joined you went on a farm walk or something like that, and you felt really inspired that you saw something being done in a way that really resonated with you. And you wanted to go home and figure out how you could do that at your farm. And we've all been there, you get really excited, you go down that big rabbit hole, and maybe you read a book or something like that. Then you try it and you can't quite figure it out. You don't have the skills, you don't have the experience. It doesn't look like how it looked at the other place. Maybe it just doesn't work here, doesn't work for you. And then maybe actually you see it again, or you talk to a neighbor, or you lean into someone that's had more experience. Or what lots of us do, maybe you join a WhatsApp group, or you've gone on a Pasture for Life study tour or something like that. And then you surround yourself with a community that allows you to find safety and security in that process. And again, they share their failures, they share their learnings as well. And again, if you look at this graph that Russ has put together, there's a lot of different aspects in this, some that turn you down, some that turn you up, but so many of the upwards motivational pieces focus around people, community, network, and learning. Not being afraid to lean into other people and spaces, but also not being afraid to not know the answers. And I think that's a really, really key thing to think, right? Because when we talk about companies as a business or community, the point is it's a group of people. I feel a lot more invigorated having people in my company, Cotswold Cattle Company. It's a spread of skill sets, it's a spread of perspectives. Whereas in my grass-fed farmer stuff, the consultancy, that's more of a one-man band. So I've got much less scope to move quickly to pick up new skills because it's just me. As soon as there's other people involved, our ability to move quickly and to make good decisions is a lot more effective in that half of what I'm doing. So have a think on that. Take a screenshot of this. Where do you think you are now? Where have you been? And what kind of things might pick you up out of that trough? Or what kind of things might you see coming that you might think might be a bit of a speed bump? And if you can see those speed bumps coming, what could you do or what could you put in place to try and mitigate that? So there's all these different ways that we might be able to tap into peer learning and community. And a theme for me, which we're going to come on to in a second, is we are all very different. We touched on mindset, but there's things that light us all up in different ways. Things that excite one person don't excite another. We have different personalities, character traits, learning styles, all of these different nuances that make us the human beings that we are. So it's impossible to lean into all of these different things all at once. You simply just probably won't have enough time to really have a think on the formats of community that really light you up. When is it that when you integrate with a group of people, you come away feeling really energized, motivated, that you've learned something, as opposed to feeling drained or demotivated and you don't want to partake? That might be the people, it might be the content, it might be because you've had a good day or a bad day, but it could also be the format in which you are engaging. So for me, I'm in all the WhatsApp groups, they're all muted because I just have an inundation of messages and emails all the time. And if I have notifications popping up on my phone, it just whatever. So I very rarely actually integrate in that format. It doesn't work for me. Sometimes I dip in and see the odd little golden nugget, but for me, it's too much. I really love the more, again, some people think I'm really into social media. I've got a very mediocre following of like 7,000 people, whatever. I actually hate it. It's a struggle for me to do it. I kind of do it because I feel it's something I should do. I don't really interact with it much. I don't comment on much. I don't respond to very much either. But where I really do get let up is more in a tight group of people. So that could be a kind of a cluster or a group of farmers where you're going on regular farm walks. Maybe it's in your region. You know, we've got like our Pasture for Life Cotswolds or Pasture for Life Wessex or Scotland or whatever. Maybe that works better for you. A smaller group of people with less frequent personal interaction. I really love conferences, live events, short, sharp, intense burst where I can go in like 1 or 2 days, just soak up a lot of info, talk to a lot of people, but then actually I can check out of that and just go back to that kind of more introverted half of me, which I do have, believe it or not. So it took me a little bit of time to figure this out. I don't need to participate in all of these things, but now I know the things that really light me up, where I get a lot of growth out of it, where I actually remember the thing that I heard instead of being overwhelmed. Can anyone think of any others that I've missed off of this list that they think have been really key for them?
Debbie put in the chat podcasts.
Yeah, podcast, massive one. I don't know how I missed that.
Also from Dorrit, just reaffirming some of the stuff you already said: conferences, meetings, farm visits.
And what's the difference really between conferences, farm walks, and something else like a WhatsApp group or a Facebook group? What's the key thing in those? What's the real difference between those kind of two types, if you like?
Rachel said that they're more face to face.
Maybe we would use a word like connection. Again, company, community, culture. It's about people having a connection, a shared purpose. Even if it's different perspectives or mindsets, even if you're a very conventional, intensive, high input farmer or a completely organic, agroecological one, you're still farming and probably love your business and your land. And actually, you could find connection within that common ground, which is quite hard to do in a WhatsApp group. Is that Deborah's hand?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the things about this format, for example, is that, we're kind of struggling. If we were wandering around somebody's farm right now, these conversations would be happening, I think. It's quite, I personally find these kind of interactions quite tricky, and you don't quite know who's there and quite who's listening, and you feel a bit exposed when you want to speak. So definitely the face-to-face thing is a big thing for me. And also, I suppose, connected with that is that lots of us on farms lead fairly solitary lives, and so that moment of connection can be really, really vitalizing. I can cope with a WhatsApp group if it's a group of people that I've met in another context that I want to keep a connection with. But I think a WhatsApp group on its own can be really hard to penetrate, to make a useful connection with.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Deborah. It's really appreciated. And you're right, actually. And in the same way, the WhatsApp group could be incredibly valuable, because if we are isolated in our daily routine on our farm, maybe that WhatsApp group is our way that we can touch base with people. And it can be our daily contact with friends or peers or whatever. So they're both equally valuable, but we get different things out of them. And it might light you up in different ways, right? So if we really want to get the most out of peer learning and applying it at home, I thought, what does that look like? And these are the ideas that I jotted down. So I think we really need to understand your context. We might have heard an idea or listened to a talk of something that a farmer did in Australia. Great idea, it's really cool. And we could soak up that information, and maybe it will work in your context, maybe it won't. Again, different elements of context, mindset, the people stuff, family dynamics. So how can we really frame and create kind of safe to fail trials to try ideas and understand that some things might work great with your resources, with your skills, with your farm, in your environment, in your part of the world, with your infrastructure, etc. However, other things that maybe your neighbour's doing, for whatever reason of all these different variables, might not work. And it might just be over the fence. And that's okay, because they've all got incredibly unique individual contexts. And those things, as I said earlier, are always evolving. So if you've not done this before, sit down at home, either on your own. We've all got personal context. We also have business context and broader family or team dynamic context. Really jot down and try and figure out what is your context. Now, there's all these different moving parts. There's the economic side of your context, financial freedom, resources, capital, assets, land, all that kind of thing. Enterprises, income, debt, all of these things that make up that financial and economic picture. Profitability, gross margins, what enterprises are working, which ones aren't. The more clarity we have over that, the more we can see kind of deadwood to cut out and opportunities to maybe lean into that we're not doing already. Then there's the social side. So what makes you tick as an individual, as a human being, as a business person, as a farmer, as a learner, as a teacher, as a husband or wife, whatever it might be. What are those things? As well as what are the things for the other people that are important in your context, for the rest of your team, for your family, etc. And then that environmental piece. The context in Scotland is very different to Cornwall. Even where I am in the Cotswolds, I can see Gloucester at the bottom of the hill, very different environment on that Gloucester floodplain by the River Severn than just literally 5 miles up in the gods of the Cotswolds. So, you can see it, but it's a very different context. One thing I really love doing on my journey through coaching last year was understanding what my core values were. And I'd never done this exercise. And I did it with a friend, Greer, and it took us ages. We thought we'd do it in like an hour, and we were both sat there like 5 hours later and hadn't quite done it. But when we say values, what are the things that when you are really honest with yourself, you don't live without, and you always have in your life and make you tick? Or if you don't have them, things kind of unravel, or you feel out of place, out of person, and other parts of your life just, don't quite click. So for me, I really realized that autonomy is very important, authenticity, environment, agency, freedom, kind of a lot of theme in that. So I've felt a very different human being after stepping out of employment into self-employment, because for the first time, really, in my adult life, I've really lent into my core values of autonomy. And yours might be completely different. It might be family or connection or recognition or whatever. There's a very long list of things that you can resonate as a value. When you understand that, what your core values are, it really allows you to do a number of things. Build the business and make the decisions that align with your values. Because when that happens, things feel a lot easier. There's a lot less friction. There's a lot less friction. So your ability to move with motivation, and that kind of feeling that energized and excited about what you're doing almost just becomes autonomous. It also allows you to really show up and be your best self, because you're being true to what really matters to you. And if you have to make a tough decision and one really disaligns with your values, then it's a good indicator not to go with that decision, because you will inevitably start feeling the complete opposite. What's also important with all of this is to understand what are the core values of other key people in your business and in your life. Because if I behave in a way that is the complete polar opposite of the number one core value of my business partner, guess what? We're probably going to have a few big arguments, right? And it's not going to do very well for the business. So there's an element of empathy here, like how to work best for yourself, but how do you integrate with how other people really need to show up? Similar to that as our talent dynamic. So this is something that I did before I started to create programs, the agricultural coaching, really understanding what are the things that make you tick, not just values, but kind of character traits or the way that your mind works, things, tasks, or roles or responsibilities that you're naturally going to step into and thrive, and again, feel energized and easy, compared to things where you naturally want to avoid, or it gives you anxiety, or you just really don't enjoy, don't click in that way. So talent dynamics is one of these specific frameworks. But again, what that allowed me to do was understanding my talent dynamic, which is STAR, which is a bit more kind of big blue sky thinking, out in the world, kind of a bit more extroverted, all that kind of thing. It made me realize, where can I bring value into groups, networks, my business, family, all of that thing, where I'm really leaning into what makes me tick, so I can show up and make the whole group and the whole space be better off with that. At the same time, understanding what someone else's might be. They might be very analytical, or maybe they're really creative. So how can you design those roles or create those spaces in your communities that really let people step into that? Another one's accountability, right? That's been a big one for me. Like, ultimately, if you want to create change, if you want to get results or see new outcomes in your business, on your farm, or in your life, you've got to just take the reins and grab the bull by the horns. We can do all the podcasting and all the WhatsApp groups, and it's only going to get us so far. At some point, we just got to grab it and run with it and not be afraid to fail. But don't set yourself up to fail big time, that it kind of causes a big problem straight away. Similar to that as agency, to what extent can you build that confidence that you know what, I am accountable, I am going to do this thing, and move the pieces across the board and find the resources or make the decisions to actually get the ball rolling and make the thing happen. And a big one for me, which comes back to that perspective, which is pick your framing. You know, I've been in Cardiff the last 3 days until 10:30 at night, setting up one of our catering trailers at some Christmas lights, training new agency staff that we've got in. And it's not the most fun thing in the world. And it'd be quite easy to stand there in the cold going, you know what, I bloody hate standing here 10:30 at night flipping burgers, blah, 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 blah. Or I can go in and go, hey, you know what? Like, I get to come down here, work on my business, learn a lot, help these guys get set up so they can earn a bit more money for Christmas and send out the best burgers ever and put smiles on the faces of these families that have paid to come into these Christmas lights. So it's the same situation, the same person. And sometimes I can feel both of those things. I can be driving down in the car listening to my podcast going, you know what, I'd rather be at home watching the rugby. And I can stand in that trailer and flip that. And because I've actively flipped that and chosen to think like that, the way that I am in that trailer with that team, with that people, that community of people is very different. So think on that. How do you want to show up with your framing, your perspective? Right. Do we want to take a little break? That's kind of the peer learning piece from me. There's a lot to get through. We've not got all night, and there's a kind of a second half to this, but there's a lot of themes in there. I'd just really urge you to think back on that last slide. Context, values, perspective, accountability. Really lean into what lights you up and let others lean into what lights them up. And think on the formats that work for you and don't feel you need to do all of it. For me, that's the value of peer learning and community. If anyone's got any questions, I'll take them, but maybe we'll stop for a quick break, should we, Jamie, and then start the second half, or do you want to just crack on?
Yeah, we'll stop for 5 minutes, come back to some quick questions, and then we'll move on. Does that sound all right?
Yep,
Cool. So we'll see everyone back at 4:25.
perfect.
Great.
Hi, are you there? No. Uh,
Hi, Dorrit. Do you have a question?
Okay, yeah, I'm fighting the tech on my phone.
Me too.
You know what? I don't know, this is probably coming up in a minute, but I have shown all our neighbors and anybody who wants to listen and doesn't a really big shift in management that we're doing, like not taking the calves off the cows, not taking the calves out of the herds. And nobody thinks it's doable. And they see us all the time. How do you get to people that, I don't know? Well, the ones that aren't interested, I think, forget it. But the ones that are interested but don't have the nerve, I think it's
So,
the way I present it. But then also our neighbors see what we're doing and they wouldn't copy it.
mhm.
It's so weird.
So I guess how, if they're interested but haven't quite made the step and they're potentially nervous about the outcome of what would happen if it went wrong, how could they frame it in a way where they can do it and try it in a way that's less risky? So if they've got 100 cows, maybe they just do it with 10 in year one and observe what really happened. Did it work? Is it a nightmare? If it wasn't a nightmare, maybe next year they try it with 25, 30. And even if they did do it in the deep end with all 100, that we know that some animals still aren't going to do the natural weaning very effectively. So that's part of that journey, I think, is figuring out which animals will it work and which ones don't. So I think with any change on farm, particularly those that might cause some kind of financial impact, it's important to set things up as a safe to fail size and scale of trial. So that's a way to frame it potentially that might give them a bit more confidence.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's very drastic and it's breaking with tradition.
Hmm.
And that's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tradition is strong, isn't it?
And people are, it is difficult for people to change, even people that are kind of in this world of regen ag and all that kind of thing. Like I see it a lot. When it comes down to it, and I can see it myself as well. I don't natural
Mm.
wean, but I'll just put the nose flaps in, the spiky ones, and that's what I'm going to do. I'll keep them together, but I haven't quite got the balls to not do the nose flaps because I've tried it, and for me, I had problems. I kind of dipped
Okay.
my toe in, and then now I'm like, you know what, I do want the same outcome, but I'm gonna do it in a way that's kind of a halfway house, if that makes sense. So
Okay.
it's a tricky one.
Yeah, maybe it's too radical. I don't know.
Are you talking?
We've just muted yourself,
Yeah, are
Judith.
you talking about milking cows with calves or beef cows?
Not weaning, so just keeping the cows and calves
All right.
together.
Yeah.
These are these are beef ones. I love to do dairy as well, but at the moment it's beef cattle and we just let the cows wean the calves and they're fine. And the few that are not fine, you spot really quickly. So I just don't understand why the people that see us don't even try and copy.
I
Mm.
think it's fear.
Hmm.
I think a lot of it is fear because they're just used to doing what they're used to doing, and anything new is a bit scary.
Mm.
But there's a new film just out about David Finlay's cow with calf dairy in southwest Scotland at the moment. That would have been, if it was dairy, I would have said get them to have a look at that because it's doing the rounds. It's just come out in the last couple of months.
He has done it for what, 20, 30 years?
I don't know
And
if he's
he
done, I don't know if he's done cow with calf for that long. He's been organic for
no,
30,
he has done it and then he
but he's
stopped
done,
because
yeah.
it didn't work and then he's now doing it big style. But he does take them off at 6 months. But in the dairy, yeah, you see
Mhm.
why.
Right, should we carry on, Jamie? We got any more questions before we do?
Yeah, we'll take one more quick question if there is one. Um, if not, we'll just crack on.
Cool.
Yeah.
So, what have been some of our biggest challenges in farming in the UK? quite a lot in the last 5 years. Anyone want to chuck some out there on the chat or just shout out? Or I'll just shout them out.
Routes to the market, Silas, just becoming more and more difficult, really.
Yep, routes to market, and also pressures from the market, wanting to see certain outcomes and bigger squeeze and bigger expectations potentially. So yeah, lots of market pressures.
Disconnect from the public and lack of
Yeah,
understanding.
that urban-rural divide, it's a big one.
Someone in the chat said loss of subsidies.
Yeah, politics, subsidies, policy, all of that. It's a big one. Any others?
Climate and weather.
Yeah, right. Exactly. That's the one we're going to talk about. Yeah, so it looks different for all of us. Obviously, you guys up in Scotland might have seen different things to some of us down in the south of England, but generally what we're seeing is less consistent and predictable weather. So since 2018, I can think of 3 years of really big, hot, dry droughts in England. And I think actually a lot of that did get up to the east coast of northern England and Scotland, from what I heard. 2018, 22, and this year. And in between those big drought years, we've had some of the wettest years on record, not just winters, but summers, springs, as well as also the driest springs and the driest summers and the driest winters. So that's quite a volatile thing. Yet we're trying to farm with financial outcomes that we want to keep fairly consistent. So how do we mitigate and build resilience into this more predictably unpredictable climate we're going to see? And actually, that's kind of the same or very similar challenges that most of the global system is facing as well. A lot of crops are going to start to fail. Something like coffee's, it's very susceptible to big swings in climate and problems. We see it in the news all the time: forest fires, floods all over the world, America, Australia. It's the same story. It's just a different context. Yet what we also see in those examples are farmers and businesses that have built systems that have mitigated and navigated through those climate pressures and kept their businesses working and thriving despite all of that. So that's what we're going to dive into now: managing for climate resilience. And this picture here actually is in August, end of August, of that big drought in 22. So on this farm in Oxford, it didn't rain from, I think it was the first couple of days in June until the 14th of September. Yet what we saw was no fluctuation in daily live weight gain. They actually put on more weight than they did in the following wet summer. No loss or reduction in fertility. Basically no impact to the economic picture of the suckler cow enterprise or the dairy stores. All we did was tweak the grazing management, and the system in general was geared up to mitigate when this happened, as well as the following years that came with extremely high rainfall. So we'll dive into that in a little bit. So for me, climate resilience is directly linked to soil health and your grazing management, particularly soil aggregation, the power of soil biology, and biomass above ground and biomass below ground. Now, there's obviously more nuance than that, and there's more things at play. But for me, these are the three things. If we focus on these three things, we'll be in a pretty good place. So soil is a big, wonderfully complex thing. There's kind of three main pillars. We've got our chemistry, the physics, and the biology side. Some stuff we can't do an awful lot about, like our parent geology. I'm in the Cotswolds, so very high calcium environment, low magnesium, quite easy to outwinter on, free draining soils that are well flocculated, all the Cotswold brash. But in the summer, it gets very dry very quickly. Again, you can dive into all these different things. You probably don't really have enough time. The physics side of stuff as well has a big, that's particularly around soil structure. When you start to build soil aggregation, and we have more space for water and air, biology, and all these things to move through, and minerals, can really change how your plants perform and how they're able to adapt and deal with periods of dry and rainfall. Same with the biology piece. So if our focus is on building soil aggregation and maximizing soil biology, that really focuses that hinges on our on photosynthesis, which is why that third theme for me was biomass above ground and biomass below ground. The amount of solar panel we have in our pasture and the amount of roots we have and how deep they go, pushing those root exudates down into the soil, which feeds that soil biology. And in turn, that soil biology delivers nutrients and minerals to the plants, whether that's crop or pasture. Biology delivers about 80% of that mineral cycle. So a soil dead of biology, or a compacted soil where there's no aggregation, there's no space for biology to move, your performance, your plant's ability to get the minerals it needs is massively reduced, as well as its resilience to when it's dry and when it's wet. So the theme in this is, how do we maximize photosynthesis? Because when we do that, we will build soil aggregation by feeding soil biology. Biology basically come along and they feed off of the sugary carbon exudate, which is like an energy package that the plant chucks into the soil. It's basically liquid carbon, if you like, from photosynthesis. And when the biology come and feed on that, they emit these biotic glues, which start to build these little soft round aggregates, which is what we see in our soil when it looks like a nice fluffy cake structure. Bacteria do the little fine aggregates, and soil the bigger rounder aggregates. Fungi the bigger rounder aggregates in our soil. And the more of that we have and the deeper it goes, that is climate resilience in visuals. That space for water to go, for water to be held, for roots to get down deep, and for air to get into our soils. And guess what? When that happens, plant performance, its ability to find resources when it's dry or to store them when it's wet, exponentially increases massively compared to shallow aggregation or compacted soils deep down all the way up right to the top. So what we're going to dive into is, how do we actually try and achieve that on farm? And again, there's nuance in this, right? So there's a chemistry element. Elements like boron are really key for that plant to translocate those sugars through its roots into the soil. Same, manganese, phosphorus, etc. So we really need to make sure that actually the chemistry is right for photosynthesis as well. I've had clients that have been doing tall grass grazing for 15 years, long rest recovery periods, but actually the parent geology and the chemistry and all that kind of thing is still very compacted soils, yet their management was very good. So it's a complex picture. This is a framework that I've picked up from Caroline Grindroy, which I really love. So this is the concept of your farm as a holon. And a holon is basically a series of whole complex systems that operate as their own system, but are actually part of a bigger, more complex system. So I guess an example would actually be the human body. So the human body has got your cardiovascular system, your nervous system, digestive system, etc. All very amazing, complex things in their own right. But when they come together and they work together, the product, us human beings, is far more exciting, intelligent, etc. than the things on their own. But what also happens is, if one of those systems falls down or doesn't work properly or doesn't work synergistically with the others, the whole thing is affected massively. So the big layer in that onion, in that holon, if like, is the earth system. So our weather patterns, El Nino, El Nino. What happens in January in our earth system is very different to, say, August. All these kinds of things and variables that then impacts the system below, which is that ecosystem. The ecosystem of the west coast of Scotland is very different from the east coast. The ecosystem on the north side of the glen is very different from the south side, or whatever it might be, right? So you have different ecosystems on your farm as well as regionally, and how the earth system affects those will be variable. But that's our human system. So us, our management, our thinking, our infrastructure, our equipment. That's the system that buggers everything up generally. If that system went, most things would get aligned pretty quickly. But that's the animal system, our livestock, our cattle, our sheep, our goats, our pigs, etc. How us humans decide to manage them will impact the plant system. Is that plant system being stressed out and overgrazed by the livestock system because of our management or not? The plant system is the plug from the sun to the soil. If we have bare ground and bare soil, there is no plug from the sun to the soil and to the soil biology. If we have tightly grazed, overgrazed, stressed out pastures with short, shallow root systems, that plug is not very effective compared to well-rested, nice, tall, diverse pastures with diverse, tall, deep root systems. And what happens is, if we get the layers lined up and we manage our livestock in a way that allows the plant system to be and behave how it really wants to be, and that can get that carbon cycle and everything else really flowing through into our soil system, and we then feed that biology and we build that aggregation and we improve soil structure down deeper and deeper and deeper, we have more biology and more space and more minerals and chemistry moving around and more water, it all bounces back up. Our pastures are more nutritious, they're more diverse, they're more resilient to the dry, they don't get waterlogged when it's wet. And then the animals graze those, and the animals have better fertility, better growth rates. We actually see a direct impact on the bottom line in our finances, on our business, and it all bounces back up. They all get better. The ecosystem changes. We see more biodiversity, change in habitat. And actually that can also impact the earth system. If that happened at scale, we then start impacting water cycles, where we have trees and habitat and things that where we don't, right? It's fascinating. So the aim of the game is to get synergy between those things. So how do we actually do that? And what are we really managing in a farming environment? That is our ecosystem processes. So these four things are operating. You can, if you really think about it, you can see it happening. You can see them on your farm. And we'll come on later into how you can monitor them as well. So this is happening in the Amazon rainforest, in like the Siberian tundra, like all of that stuff, as well as in my farm in the Cotswolds and your farm in Scotland. So there's the carbon cycle, the one we've all heard about, right? There's two halves to this. There's photosynthesis, or the liquid carbon pathway, plants pushing sugary carbon exudates into the ground through photosynthesis, which is going on in the growing season. So the aim of our game, if our number one focus really was how do we get as much photosynthesis as possible, in our context, that only really happens in between May and October. Maybe in Scotland, a little bit less. If in a good year, it might be April until November. So that's the window to really get that carbon cycle, that energy pump flowing. It is an energy pump. Everything that grows is coming off of that pump. Pasture growth, biology, animals, the meat that your animals put on, the milk that they produce is coming from energy. There's free energy from the sun, and there's bought energy from fuels and synthetic inputs, right? The more energy that we produce off of farm in meat, milk, fiber, that comes from a free energy source, the sun, compared to bought energy, the healthier, more resilient our business will be. So photosynthesis. The other half of our carbon cycle is what we can try and lean into and keep ticking along, particularly in the winter time or at the end of the growing season when we've built up a bit more of a store of woodier, more mature pasture. So when we see plant material, whether that's tall grass or hay or straw, the browner and twiggier it is, the higher the carbon to nitrogen ratio, i.e. the more carbon there is in it compared to nitrogen. The greener it is, the more high in nitrogen it is compared to carbon. So when we hear about these kind of phrases like graze a third, trample a third, leave a third, it might be a good place to start. You might see some benefits with it, but actually the last thing you want to do in the first week of May is trample all your green grass into the ground, because you've just trampled your solar panel. You've just trampled very nitrogen rich material into the soil, which is likely bacterially dominated anyway. Bacteria love nitrogen and fungi love carbon. So generally, when we increase the carbon stocks in our soil, what we see in line with that is an increase in fungi. And when we get an increase in fungi, that mineral cycle gets more effective, and the translocation of water through soil, etc., gets better as well as building more of those bigger aggregates instead of just the fine, smaller ones. So things like trampling, I lean into and do a lot more in the winter time or at the end of summer when pasture is browner and more mature, or we can use tools like bale grazing to trample that browner material in. And that will feed biology as well, like your earthworms and saprophytic bacteria and fungi. And we can start to physically build soil from the top down through building that humus layer of breakdown biomass. Intrinsically linked with that is our water cycle. So that biomass piece that I mentioned earlier, biomass above ground acts like a giant sponge. When it rains, it slows down the water cycle. What we want to avoid is a fast water cycle. So what happens in the Highlands or in the Lake District when it rains, or what happens when down the road where I am in Monmouth this week, it rained, hit tightly grazed, compacted soils on the hills, lacking trees, and really fast water cycle into the watercourses, went down and flooded the town. With more biomass, trees and different trophic layers, trees, hedgerows, taller pasture, that all gets slowed down. The movement of water slows. What it also does, as well as slowing it down to stop flooding, it stops it leaving the farm so quickly to give it more time to get down into the soil where we want to hold on to it. So with the biomass above ground acting like that sponge that slows it down, and we've hopefully got, what we should see with good biomass above ground is good biomass below ground with our root structures. And if we've been doing that for a while, we've been building soil aggregation by feeding that biology through photosynthesis, we also get a sponge below the ground. And the more we build soil aggregation, the bigger that sponge gets. So when it does rain and that nice tall grass has slowed it down, it's got lots of space to go into the soil. So all of a sudden, your ability to hold on to water you get goes up a lot. We can measure this with an infiltration rate. How long does it take 2 inches of water to be absorbed into your soil? The more water or the more effective rainfall you have, i.e. if you get 3 inches of rain, you want to store 3 inches of rain in your soil, not 1 inch and lose 2 down into the river. Again, key part of climate resilience and intrinsically linked to the carbon cycle because of photosynthesis ability to build aggregation. Also soil biology, right? Dry soils isn't great for biology. They need water. They're living things the same as we are. Water, air, and energy, food. Same as us human beings, right? Carbon, water, and air. What also happens with that biomass is when it does rain, as well as slowing it down, it stops the evaporation as well. So if it gets hot in the summer, it hits shallow, tightly grazed pastures, nowhere for the water to go, hard baked ground, sun comes out and all evaporates. So we can start to influence our water cycle quite a lot just by changing our opening covers and our grazing residuals and building our aggregation. We've touched on our mineral cycles. As I said, once we feed and increase our soil biology activity, improve soil aggregation, there's more space for soil biology to move and transfer nutrients. And as we start to build more carbon stocks in our soil, it actually also increases the amount of nutrients that are available. And other things change like redox and oxidization, etc., that influence that mineral nutrient exchange in our soil with higher aggregation. Our plants start to be able to access a much bigger pool of resources to grow and to be healthy and to function properly. And that translocates up into your livestock. Your livestock will then perform better, as we said earlier. Other things with your mineral cycle, obviously a lot of what I just described is depending on biology being active and photosynthesis, which doesn't happen in the winter. Yeah, biology kind of falls asleep when it gets too cold, which is why plants don't grow, because they're not getting the nutrients. Nothing's really photosynthesizing. The biology is asleep. What we can do in the wintertime, similarly to trampling the carbon, whether that's through trampling mature pasture with livestock or bale grazing, that's also trampling nutrient. Yeah, particularly things like potassium and sulfur. They're really key nutrients that are dependent on the decomposition of plant material. So we often see if you're sulfur deficient, you know, if you use a tool like bale grazing or potassium, or whatever, that can actually increase that, and your plants that come back in the springtime will be healthier and better than the ones that were there before, because you're starting to influence that mineral cycle in the winter as well. One we often don't hear about is airflow. So airflow kind of, for me, I think about it on 3 trophic levels again. Landscape airflow, which for me is really obvious, right? You know, if you're in a landscape that is, you know, void of trees and void of hedgerows, when it's windy, you really feel it. So do your livestock. When it's cold, they'll drop performance. They'll actively go and look for shelter. And again, when it's hot as well. So with your macro level of airflow in the winter, you're going to feel the cold more, and in the summer, you're going to feel the hot more, unless you have the ability to manage airflow. If we can slow airflow down, we will have cooler areas in the shade in the summer, and it'll be warmer in the winter. And that also impacts pasture growth. So not just livestock performance, but also grasses and other plants in your pastures in the UK biome have all evolved to be in partial shade, in kind of wood pastoral landscape, lots of herbivores, wolves, bears, etc. Which is why even in a drought situation, you'll notice that your pasture that stays green or comes back quickest will be the stuff around trees and around hedgerows. Airflow, water cycle, etc. is all much more functional. So under that landscape level of our trees and hedgerows, we've then got that pasture cover again, this kind of middle layer. If you go into your pasture on a windy day and stand up, if you've got tall grass, you'll feel the wind. And if you sit down on that tall grass, that wind pressure will be noticeably less. So what's happened is that tall biomass is actually slowing down and insulating that airflow above the soil. So again, in the winter, that insulation within your pasture is making better, warmer conditions for your livestock to sit down in. They'll actively notice that, and their internal core temperature will lift. They'll burn less calories, keeping warm. But what you're also doing is insulating the soil above the ground. So what you'll often see is pastures that you grazed less tightly in the autumn or the winter come following spring, and you've left more of an insulation and cover, will spring flush earlier, because the soil temperature will be higher because it's been insulated. In the summer, it does the opposite. It'll keep it cooler and hold on to moisture. So if it gets hot and dry, that tall pasture will keep that soil microbiology working better. And then the last one is the airflow actually down into our soils. So again, back to our soil aggregation, space for air and water to go and for biology to move. Now, another key thing with airflow is that natural nitrogen cycle. We've all heard the stuff. We've got X amount of tons of nitrogen above every hectare in the air. That's no good if you have a compacted soil structure. The air's got nowhere to go. And the nitrogen cycle basically happens inside of those soil aggregates. So if you imagine those soil aggregates have basically got little rhizobacteria in them, which I guess the aggregate's a bit like an anaerobic digester or a little nuclear power plant. So when you get the airflow going into your soil and your soils are transpiring and everything else, and your bacteria basically converting it from nitrogen into more plant available nitrogen, which gets deposited into the soil. Other things as well, like, you know, other biology like our protozoa and that swimming around, popping out nitrogen as they eat bacteria. It's all linked to space and for air being able to get in. So when we basically start to manage our grazing in a way that facilitates our carbon cycle, water cycle, mineral cycle, and airflow to improve and get more effective, what we see pretty much 10 times out of 10 on farm is an increase in biodiversity above ground and an increase in biodiversity below ground, alongside resilience to dry, hot, wet rain. That's the secret to climate resilience for me in a grazing system, and actually in any farming system. It's the same thing in arable. The better soil aggregation you have and the more soil biology, and the better your ability to hold on to water and to allow your biology to move that mineral cycle around, your plants will be able to perform in ways that they didn't before when it gets hot, dry, or wet. So the key tools in that it really grazing, everything that animal does, sorry, grazing is the act of that animal tearing at that plant. So a cow comes around with her tongue and she wraps around that pasture and pulls it up. Now, the response that plant gives can be quite variable depending on the growing conditions, the time of year, the severity of that grazing, the frequency of that grazing. Yeah, if that cow takes half the plant compared to 90%, the plant is going to respond in a very different way. Same compared to December, compared to May, the plant will respond in a different way. So how do we set up our fields, our paddocks, our cells, whatever our grazing system looks like in a way that we get the outcomes we want in that grazing interval? Because our plants speak, right? They send chemical signals, phytochemicals, into the soil. Once something happens, like they've been grazed, they'll just send chemical signals in, which will draw biology to them to bring nutrients and stuff. The other one is animal impact, which is everything your animals do that isn't grazing. Trampling, lying down, muck, urine, saliva, etc., etc. So we can influence things like that with the design or the shapes or stock of your cells or areas your animals are in, or stocking densities. Or it leans into the other element, which is time. How long are animals in one place for, and how long until they come back again? And again, there's no one answer or template. Those combinations of grazing, animal impact, and time will look very different in your context to a different context, depending on the outcomes you want to achieve, the time of year, the growing conditions, etc., your skills, resources, time constraints, whatever it might be. So a good way to visualize this, there's the split screen picture here of a farm that I used to manage in Oxford. On the left is, judging by the trees, it's probably November time, November, maybe early December. Outwintering, bale grazing, 200 head of cattle on half a hectare on medium heavy clay in the wettest winter on record. So that's quite a high utilization rate in our grazing with a lot of animal impact. That's 200 animals in half a hectare for 24 hours. And I've bale grazed, and we've not poached it. We've trampled in a good amount of brown material. We've left ground cover with both pasture and hay. And then we've moved them on to the next one. Again, in very difficult conditions, in the wettest winters on record. And this wasn't like the best looking cell. This is consistent, right? On the other half of this picture is the same field, but in June. So what I would do in that block is I would graze it again in the summertime, once in the winter and once in the summer. But the grazing animal impact in time would be very different. So when I might have had 200 animals in half a hectare for 24 hours and graze a lot and trample a lot, on the right-hand side, they might be in 3 or 4 hectares for 24 hours with no hay bales, and I might only be grazing 50% of that plant and leaving the other 50. Thinking about how those carbon cycles and water cycles are behaving differently in November compared to June. So what we've seen there is our ability to have animals outside during the winter changed massively. The biodiversity we saw in those pastures changed very quickly because of that animal impact, etc., and how our ability to deal with wet winters and dry summers massively improved. So we have this constantly evolving flux between what's going on in the earth system with our weather, that ecosystem, that human system, animal system, etc. This is a similar visualization. On the left is the springtime. I've moved a mob of cows and calves from the right-hand side of that left picture to the left. You almost can't see the difference. My aim in my game then in May is I want to maximize photosynthesis. I want as much bright green, tall, dense grass as possible to get as many deep roots down to get as much of those carbon extracts and photosynthesis as possible. In the right-hand side is that outwintering again. High utilization, things aren't photosynthesizing. I'm thinking more about trampling that brown litter in. But the management to be able to do that depended on what I did from spring through the summer until I got until winter. So that allowed me to do that in those wet winters, building that climate resilience through thinking about photosynthesis and biomass. So little few snapshots. What am I thinking about in the spring? Basically, take less in that grazing and move more. And again, I don't like giving out exact figures because it will look different on every farm. So generally what I want to do is really focus on the plant system. Let the plant system do what the plant system wants to do, which is to grow and to not be stressed and to get those roots down nice and deep. And you just want that giant solar panel pump to be shoving as much carbon through your system as possible. Again, lots of greens, not many browns, right? I don't want to trample. I want to leave most of the flowers behind for the pollinators, etc. I wanted the cows just to graze where all the nutrition is in that top 25%. In the summer, bit different. This is a picture again in that 2022 drought. You know, I don't know how clear it is on your screens, but you can see the fence up the middle. That's where the cows came from. You know, our stocking rate in this block was 1.7 grazing livestock units a hectare. And we did this in a 3-month rotation. So from June until 14th of September, we'd gone round the block. We did this we had 3 blocks of sucklers and dairy stalls. They're all about similar in terms of the outcomes we saw. But it's 3 months to get round, and I'd left 50% behind on that first grazing. So you can see that actually, even though we didn't get any rain, there was still a lot of biomass there that was photosynthesizing, and we trapped onto water. I had a group of farmers in this field at the end of August, and we all got our hands down through the pasture and put our fingers into the soil. And it hadn't rained in 3 months, and the soil was still damp. We were creating and influenced our own water cycle. So our pastures stayed green, as you can see in that picture. Our animals' daily live weight gain actually went up by 0.1 of a kilo compared to the following wet winter. You know, we were finishing animals in 22 months on 100% pasture. Our fertility was 95%, and the metrics were the same. The drought year, the wet year, you know, apart from a few tiny little differences that were negligible. So that is climate resilience. Nature threw this thing at us, this big drought, but the farming business performance stayed consistent. Autumn, a little bit more nuanced to me. I'd like to treat different parts of the farm differently. So I might graze more on some bits and graze less on others. I'm thinking 6, 7, 8 months ahead. Where do I want my animals to be in the springtime? How I treat those pastures will be different to the ones that I'm not going to graze until next summer. I may as well squeeze out more animal days from the pastures I'm going to graze later on next year, so I can keep them outside for longer and save money. And the pastures that I really need the cows to be able to go to calve at the end of April, the following spring or early May, I really need to make sure that there's good, nutritious pasture there with enough feed value for those cows if we get a difficult spring. So a lot about your ability to build climate resilience is in your grazing management. You know, as I say, it's the soil aggregation, the pasture, but it's also in your planning to be able to look up and look ahead. What do I need out of the farm, the herd, this individual paddock 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 8 months from now? And what do I do in my management to make sure I get those outcomes so I don't get those headaches, so that you've got a plan B and a plan C? Finally, we get onto that winter. You know, some contexts outwintering is easy, others it's difficult. Some you might not be able to do it at all, but we can all probably graze in a way through the growing season that allows us to stay out for longer, even if it's not the whole winter. When you do that, you save a lot of money compared to housing your animals. So if the climate resilience thing is around how do we deal with it when we get the difficult weather, actually, how can we end up in a place where if we get the drought, we're not feeding hay all summer, and if we get the wet summer, the wet winter or whatever, we factored that into our grazing management so our pastures hold up. Because actually it's not just in your ability for your pastures to perform, it's in how much money can how much gross margin do your animals make you per unit. And a lot of that comes down to cost in as well as the payment you get out. So for me, that's where outwintering really comes in. But that you only get to that point by managing for those ecosystem processes and soil aggregation across the whole year. And this is what it can look like. This field was this block basically the following spring. And again, succession, biology, resilience, biodiversity, all the stuff that makes us excited. This was just like I think it had like a handful of species of grasses, lots of moss, docks, ragwort, etc. This is what it looked like after the second winter of outwintering. None of this was put there with a tractor. This is all natural ecology that was sat in the latent seed bank, just by getting grazing, animal impact, and time managed in a way that got the outcomes we wanted, that built up biodiversity and resilience, consistently across different seasons. How do we monitor this? There's so many different things, and we've only got limited time. I actually don't find this stuff very exciting, but it's quite important for what I do. The simple ones, which are key, which we can all do and are free: dig holes, monitor what's going on in your soil, particularly soil aggregation. If we've got hard, blocky, angular looking soil, which is compacted, lacking air, lacking space for water and biology, or we're starting to see increasing amounts of soil aggregation and better soil structure, more air, more fluffy, light, airy structure. And take photos, log it on Soil Mentor, or just log it on your phone and make notes. Aggregation and compaction. Next one is infiltration rates. So that's really key to your water cycle. Aggregation is a result of your carbon cycle, getting more photosynthesis, more biology. Infiltration rates is also linked to aggregation, but it's showing you how effective is your water cycle. Bang a ring in, you can see it at the bottom of this picture by that spade. And time, how long it takes to absorb 2 inches of water into that soil. So on that farm in Oxford, our worst fields took over 2 hours when we baselined all the data. Heavy clay, floodplain, monitored in October, lots of compaction, etc. 2 hours, we stopped the test, the water was still there. Those same fields, after year 4, when we finished the study, in the same weather conditions at the same time of year, took less than 30 seconds. Now, I'm not good at maths, but that's thousands of percent, as far as I'm concerned, improvement just through grazing management and building soil aggregation using cows and pasture. The other one's rooting depth. Are your plant roots getting nice, dense, deep roots down into the ground? Because that is your ability to break up compaction and feed soil biology. If you have shallow roots, no matter how long you leave your grass and what you do in your management, or if your roots are hitting a compaction layer and going sideways or something like that, there might be something to look at. You might need some kind of mechanical intervention. There might be something wrong with not wrong, but something out of balance with your plant nutrition or chemistry that's stopping that from happening. So if those things aren't improving, just come back and ask why. Be curious, ask those questions, lean into that peer learning, tap into that group, ask the question to your friend, to that community that might have the answers. So all of this stuff, whether it's the peer learning or the climate resilience or managing for better businesses or more biodiversity, whatever it is that excites you, so much of it comes down to your ability to be curious, ask questions, and have active observation. Really notice the outcomes of what you intended to do, or even what you didn't intend to do, and log it and try and dig down to, okay, why did that happen, or why didn't it happen? And you really start to build a picture of your own evidence of what's going on in your world, in your environment. As I say, this stuff will evolve and it will change. So, just embrace that growth mindset. Go back to, almost that school mindset of learning, and really lean into that network to get the most out of you, your business, and your farm. So that's it from me. Slightly over time, but any questions, fire away.
Yep, absolutely. If anyone has any questions, we are slightly over time, but feel free to take the next couple of minutes just to ask Silas anything before we let him go for this evening. Again, just anything in the chat, if you'd rather. I'm also just going to launch. We have a poll. If everyone could maybe just take 60 seconds just to complete this poll, it's good to get feedback towards Scottish Government who are funding this programme. just to show us what they're getting bang for their buck wise. If you do not have time this evening, I will add it into a follow-up email. And again, if you could just fill that out as soon as you can, it makes a massive, massive difference to programs like this going forward.
Okay. Can I ask a question to Silas, please?
Yep,
Sure.
go for it, Andy.
Thanks. Silas, at the beginning of the presentation, you you mentioned that in recent times you've been finding that rather than just thinking livestock were going to solve all the problems with regard to issues like, organic matter and plant diversity and that kind of thing, you've been having experiences that were opening your mind in that regard and perhaps bringing in more of the conventional tool set. And I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind saying a few words about that, and specifically what you've been finding that you've been changing your mind upon, and new techniques that you found useful.
Yeah, so a couple that spring to mind. I had one client kind of very much doing the, tall grass regenerative grazing system for about 15 years. And they couldn't quite figure out why the farm looked great above the ground, but below the ground we still had horrendous soil compaction. And was also seeing some odd things with livestock health that didn't quite stack. And what I figured out was, I think, just the natural parent geology and what was in the soil, they were just really deficient in boron. Also, we saw this with plant indicators. So when we were walking the pastures, there was a very obvious kind of red tinge around all the leaves as well, which is an indicator of boron deficiency. So with the health stuff, they were actually in a high magnesium environment in terms of their soil, but their animals were getting retained placentas and staggers, which are directly linked to a magnesium deficiency. Yet their soil tests were saying they're high magnesium. So they were going, well, it can't be that. Why would it be? We're high magnesium. And, there's so many complex things going on in soil chemistry. There's lots of minerals that will block up others and bully others. And then it's what gets into the soil doesn't always get into the plant because of biology. And what we thought was going on is because of the compaction and potentially a quite broken mineral cycle, what was in the soil wasn't getting up into the plant. So actually in a high magnesium environment, the livestock were showing magnesium deficiency. So what we did was we put magnesium supplements out and then looked at a few. They were organic, so we had to think about how do we look at bringing in some kind of organic chemistry like liquid seaweed and things like that might be able to lift that boron and indices and plant performance that allowed those plants to start photosynthesizing effectively, because that was what wasn't really happening on farm. The grass was growing, but there wasn't really an awful lot getting pushed into the soil to feed the biology that was building the aggregation, hence the deep compaction and shallow compaction, and the seeing of the magnesium not being pulled up from the soil to the plants of the animals. So yeah, normally I would have said, oh, you're doing it all right, but actually a few little interventions and a few tools that are also organic, we can start to get that system actually on the track to get the outcomes we want to see.
Okay, so did I understand that correctly, that the fundamental problem was lack of boron, which was suppressing the root impact underground? The roots effectively were not being able to break up the compaction because of the lack of boron, therefore not the strength to do that.
Yeah, so the boron's more about translocating the sugars from photosynthesis down in through the roots into the soil.
Okay.
So basically, boron moves that through the plant and through the roots. So yeah, it was basically a plant chemistry nutrition thing that was stopping the compaction from moving from compaction to aggregation.
Okay, fascinating.
We would then test that with testing the soil, testing plant tissue analysis, etc., to check if is our visual observation and assumption backed up by data, and if so, then let's come up with a plan to fix that.
And what were the health problems that were manifesting in the animals?
The staggers and retained placentas, which is generally down to magnesium deficiency. So they were high magnesium in the soil, which they knew from the soil test, but actually they were seeing things in the animals which were magnesium deficiency.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, ever so.
No, thank you.
Just got one more question, if you don't mind, Silas, from Rachel. There is conflicting advice on growth rates with tall grass in summer versus keeping grass vegetative. Do you have examples, figures, or thoughts on that?
So one thing we can do to monitor plant performance and nutrition is bricks. So you can get your refractometer. They use it in vineyards and wines to basically get a reading on sugars. So sugars will show how much energy is in the plant, also how effectively it is photosynthesizing, etc. as well. So I've seen a lot. I've tested assumptions both personally and seen other people and heard stories where bricks testing on what looks like mature, kind of mixed mottled browny green pasture compared to like herbal lay bright lush green. You'd say, oh well, it's the bright green herbal lay. It's going to be through the roof. Actually, it wasn't. It was the mature, dense, more woody pasture that had a higher bricks reading. So actually the nutrition was higher. That whole plant was functioning at a much higher level. And there's actually been recent report come out which looked at carbon exudate. So an unstressed mature pasture plant that is functioning and healthy, the carbon to nitrogen ratio in its root exudates from when it is growing or stressed is about 10 to 1. When it is mature and not stressed, that jumps to up to 400 to 1. I'm crap at maths. I don't know what that is. It's a 40 times fold difference or something. So that just shows how much more energy in life that plant, that mature plant that you think isn't doing an awful lot, as long as those bricks observations, basically test your assumptions. Because we always assume these things. We were told or heard these things, but actually, is it true? And you see other things, we dairy store cattle we had at my other farm, 150 dairy stores. We allocated a block for them that had all the herbal lays and there was permanent pasture. Herbal lay is always lush green, diverse. They'll do well on that. They hated it. They absolutely hated it. They put them onto the permanent pasture, heads down grazing, and better live weight gains. So, it's complex, and it will look different on every farm. But generally, the resilience you have in permanent pasture is always going to be higher. Well, not always, but generally will be higher because the natural ecology is probably more in sync with that soil, with that biology. It's had less disturbance. It's probably not had a tractor go through to seed it. It's had longer time to build those relationships, get those roots down deep. That density is there. You've probably already got better soil structure. So that whole mineral cycle will probably be working more effectively than on, say, like a bright green ryegrass and clover lay. So the answer is maybe, it depends, but test your own assumptions. Go and test your own pasture. Do leaf tissue analysis on your bright green pastures and your mature stuff. Send them to the lab. You'll get all that info back. Do your bricks test. You can do it in the field. Do it once a week, twice a day, whatever you want to do. Yeah.
I have actually tested in winter. It was December last year. I tested some both permanent pasture fields, but one that was left to grow tall and kind of looked like standing hay, and the other was had been grazed later on in the late summer, so it was still quite green. And I can't remember the figures, but the protein level in the green grass was much higher. So obviously I wasn't thinking about glucose levels and things like that. I'm not sure which is most important, but I know from like silage analysis and things, you'd be looking at things like protein, but there's maybe more to it than that.
Yeah, and there's also nuance there with like your utilization rate. So if you've got taller, mature, permanent pasture, whatever, there'll be a lot of nutrition in that kind of top third, that top quarter. Obviously, the taller, more mature a plant gets, the bottom half is more stem and less leaf. So it often looks greener around the top and more brown down the bottom. So if you're pushing animals harder and they're there longer and they're utilizing more of that total available biomass, the overall nutrition might drop. But if they're just taking the good bit off, then actually the nutrition will probably be quite high. Whereas often in the shorter vegetative grass, the utilization will be higher, but also it's not got to the point of having that higher fiber. Because also fiber makes the rumen work differently, and actually animals can convert the nutrient more effectively as well. So that's, again, there's a lot of nuance in grazing management, but you'll see you'll see evidence in your own farm that will tell you the answer for both, if that makes sense. So